All right, I guess we're streaming, so I should. Oh, no, not yet. Okay.
Just give me another moment. I'll
Okay,
tell you
sure, sure.
when we're actually streaming.
Okay. This helps because I am super nervous. So,
So
People
let's
ask
see,
about
what
what
did
it
you
is to
do,
be a
Tanny?
programmer. I always tell people that it's not about math, it's about just wanting to get every last detail correct. So I suspect that you're not alone. We're all like that.
yes, doesn't help that I'm a developer turned product manager. So, it's definitely innate there. Mhm.
Okay. Yes. So as I was just telling people before I started the stream, I'm excited to have. I'm Eric Lazarus. The fellow who started up this CodeBorging meetup. And Tanny here is a wonderfully resourceful product manager. So I had the idea, wow, I'm sure by now she's using LLMs to do cool things to make herself a better product manager. And in fact, as you have seen probably by now on the meetup, um, she's going to focus on cool strategies around dealing with being a perfectionist. And so, yeah, so why don't we start, Tanny, with a little bit about how you became a product manager and to give people a little more time to show up. That'd be great. How's that sound?
Sure. I can go into that. So, today I'm gonna go through kind of my candid exploration on perfection and procrastination, how perfectionism and procrastination, how that affects me, and how I use LLMs to kind of get past it. So my background kind of is I came from Singapore. So that kind of sets the backdrop for a culture of perfectionism or the pressure to be. And so grew up there and had the opportunity to come to America for college. And so I did mechanical engineering. And then I learned that I wasn't crazy about the engineering side of things. So that's when I found my way into simulations and explored financial modeling. So then worked in financial modeling for 10 years and wrote my first production code within the first 2 months of developing. I'm sure everyone has had that experience, yes? Um, and that was basically my entry point into just learning about the life cycle of software and developing things that people didn't care about. That really, really frustrated me. And that's how I ended up in product management because I just kept asking those questions and trying to make sure first my team or I didn't have to do things that people didn't care for. And that's as I explored more, that's when I realized before product managers were like a thing, that's kind of how I found my way into it. And then since then, now as a product manager, there are things that I do not enjoy doing. Make sure first my team or I didn't have to do things that people didn't care for. And that's as I explored more, that's okay. I can continue talking.
That was odd.
Oop, I'm sorry, my bad. Keep going.
Okay.
You may want to mute everyone except the presenter for now.
Cool. All right. So that's how I found my way into product management. And a big thing for me as a product manager, there are things that I don't enjoy doing, such as like documentation. I don't know if developers enjoy documentation, and maybe because I'm a developer turned product manager, that's not my favorite thing to do. So one of the things that I have to kind of get around is how do I get over the hump? And so kind of thinking about that, that's kind of how Eric and I came to this topic about breaking that cycle. And I want to say thank you, Eric, for the opportunity to share an idea on this. And he is very humble because I feel like I learn from him so much every time we talk. All right. So diving in, I want to first kind of talk through strategies I think about breaking the procrastination loop. So there's a few that come to mind. The two key ones are kind of doing the hardest thing first. That's one end of the spectrum. And then the other way I think about it is, I think most of us will be familiar by now, the agile approach of like making everything as small as possible. For me, I find that the most tangible because it's something that we do in our everyday work as when we think about like building the MVP, how do we break it down to smaller pieces? So when I get into a rut of my own perfectionism, that's kind of a thing that I think about. And another way I get around it is also to time box to just start doing a thing and make incremental progress. Have any of you used these approach? Just nope.
Actually, would you talk for a little bit more about when you, as a specialist, really talk about time boxing? Do you mind going on for like, because I might be doing it, but not actually a best practice way of doing it. So I'd love for you to talk about how you do it and then maybe how AI helps.
Interesting. So I think it depends on what you are time boxing for. If you're time boxing for like a spike, that is just so that you don't kind of go too deep in the rabbit hole. For me, my time box is to force myself to just spend time doing the thing I feel like I don't want to do. So it's to first start sitting and thinking about the things. And usually once I do that, I have certain ideas that I can pen down. And what then I do is I would put them into an LMM to then give me ideas on what are the next steps. And I'll go through some examples of how I do that uh, later on. But that time box is to really get over that inertia hump. So
I mean, my image of what we mean by time boxing is
mhm.
like don't even do the requirements analysis or like designs for things that can't go in to to this cycle. Is that part of what you mean when you use time boxing?
Like I said, I think it depends on what I'm applying the problem to. So it sounds like you are ideation specifically is what you are thinking about.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it sounds like you're going to go into it in more detail later in the talk. Is that right? So I can wait and ask you more questions later on.
Not specifically on time boxing, because for me, time boxing is just spending the time to just start. That's my personal biggest inertia because if I don't want to do a thing, I can find a lot of other things to do and not do the thing.
It's like putting something on the calendar and you know it's coming and you have no way to avoid it to confront your, the work that
Mhm.
you don't want to do.
Ah, okay. I'm glad you made that clearer. Okay, I had a different thought in my head. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, I've used time boxing just to say I'm looking at something and I don't know whether it's going to terminate. And so I'm just like, I'll just do as much as I can do and then I'll just be done with it. And so it's a way of just making it not run out of control.
So that
That's
is
super smart.
right. That is super helpful to kind of ensure that you don't go too deep in the rabbit hole, which
Mm.
is very helpful. Yes. Cool. And then the last thing I wanted to cover was fear setting. I'm curious, has anyone heard about this? This is a thing that is, I think, popularized by Tim Ferriss.
Not me.
Okay, so so Tim Ferriss is he's an entrepreneur and a podcaster, and he's kind of one of the key. He has done a TED Talk on this, and what really stood out was if there are things that are uh you are fearful of, what I found to be super helpful, because a lot of times the procrastination or the perfectionist in me, I have problems kind of thinking about what to do. I get stuck in the thing. So there are two kind of key areas to think about. The opportunity cost of status quo, what it means to stay in the area. So you kind of define what those things are. And then think about how would you prevent all those issues should they come up. How would you reduce the likelihood of all these things, all these what if scenarios, and then how would you mitigate those? So how would you repair that? So for status quo, you think about all those scenarios, and then the other thing about what if you actually did the thing that you're afraid of? Define all those things. What does that mean? And how you would prevent it. And these are things where if it's, I think sometimes identifying the first few is, if it's hard, I just kind of like use the LMM to kind of chat with them to ideate on what those things are. And that kind of helps put the pieces together.
Cool, because there's an anxiety technique. And I'm gonna, while you're talking, I'll try to find the official name of it. In which the anxiety therapists just makes the client, or strongly encourages the client to go into enormous detail. So what would, if you really face this thing you're procrastinating about, what really is the worst thing that could happen? And then, how would that really be that much of a problem? And what what I my brother used to be a specialist in anxiety, that for years that was all he treated. Uh, and one of the things he said was kind of wild, was on one hand, people who are highly anxious about certain things are at a certain level thinking about it almost all the time, and just a huge amount of the time, but they don't let themselves actually go to the point of, okay, well, what if I really did fail the test? Well,
Right.
what, okay, so it would reduce my average by this much, how bad would that really be? It would be very embarrassing, but you know, they don't actually tell the rest of the story. And by having them actually talk about, or maybe even write down, I think that's actually a validated anxiety technique. I can find details and paste them. If I do, I'll paste them into the Zoom.
Oh, that would be very
Yeah,
helpful.
it has been validated. There, Kahneman in his book, I don't, Daniel Kahneman and Tversky, they talk about it too. It just helps people be more aware of their biases that they're not aware of, and
Yeah,
that
if
they
you
haven't thought
find
through
anything
everything.
specific, please put it into the Zoom chat. I'm right now in the
Yeah.
middle of thinking fast and slow, and oh my God, it is totally blowing my mind. Um, Back to you, Tanny.
Cool. So the thing that I like about this is identifying like how you prevent the thing that you're fearful of, and how you would what are things that you could do, because those make it actionable, and then it kind of makes the thing that you're concerned about less scary. And there are things that then you realize, you know what, if you just do this, you can then move forward. So that I found to be super helpful. Yeah. Okay.
So,
So
you want to feel free, if you're in the mood, to actually have a little conversation with ChatGPT, where you like, do you tell it, be my partner, be my therapist, be my anxiety counselor, I mean, like anything you want to do that's like specific. Oh, I use this kind of prompt. Feel free to share if you're.
yeah,
If you,
so I have a few prompts that I'm going to go through.
Great.
Yeah. Okay. So one of my biggest anxiety is documentation. It's the thing that my it's super important, because to get it done right, because it's super helpful. So one of the things that I've done is kind of like have it help me create the document so that I get over the hump and I can actually start iterating with my stakeholders on how to make it better. Because you most of the time you just need a place to start. So this is what I found useful. It's important to specify what type of expert you are when you want it to write a thing for you. So it's helpful to specify the type of expert and the kind of formatting. I've realized because it's very good at categorization, getting it to identify tone and adjust for it, that is something that it's very powerful. And one of the things that I found really good is temperature. This is a thing where you can just specify like a parameter on how flowery you want the language to be. So if something is more, you want more flowery language, you want to put a higher number to it. And if you want something more kind of technical and specific, and you want it to back it with more research, you just lower that number. So it's very good for ideating on ideas and words. You can just push up the number. And what I've done is I do both, and then I kind of iterate to figure out the different kind of range or spectrum that I want to be on.
So you kind of do a little bit of a binary search, try different numbers and see what makes you happy. Is that what you just said?
I usually just do the like a 0.3 and a 0.7 because then I get the range and I figure like which one I'm closer to.
Nice.
That is what I found to be most useful. So for example, when we did this kind of ideation for this talk, that is what I did. I put my ideas in and I put temperature, the different variations, and I kind of pick from the different examples.
Nice. If anyone else has a quick 60 seconds of wisdom about temperature, feel free to share. Would you mind, Tanny, if someone wants?
Yeah. And I'm going to put this link in there because I found this to be super useful. There are other things that you can adjust for the length and for kind of the diversity. These I haven't played around as much because I care about the temperature more. That's the thing that matters to me. And yeah.
Anybody else want to talk about temperature for a moment, Mark? I'm sure Mark Watson has something smart to say about temperature.
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to, pardon my parrot, when I am using it to generate code and asking technical questions, I tend to set the temperature to 0 and get repeatable results. When I am kind of like pitching ideas to myself, like if I'm thinking about a new project, thinking about a new web app, whatever, then I tend to put the temperature up. But I've never been that careful. I mean, in setting like the top K values is something I used to do when writing recommendation systems to for efficiency, basically. But that's about it.
If anybody, including you, wants to give us like 60 seconds on like what does it really mean? Like what is how are LLMs interpreting the temperature?
Oh, that's pretty easy. Again, pardon my parrot.
This sounds like such a metaphor for something.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, when you basically you're predicting one token after another in an output stream. And in doing that, you're choosing across the distribution of all available tokens, and they're weighted with a probability. And if you have a 0 temperature, you're basically choosing the token with the highest probability of being correct. And as you raise the temperature, then you kind of widen your sampling of that distribution. And now, rather than putting my pet bird in the other room, I'm going to mute.
Okay, thanks. Okay, back to you, Tanny. Do you like my asking for input like this? Or you want?
Yeah, I think it's helpful.
Okay, good. I'm enjoying doing it this way. So, okay, go ahead, Tanny.
Okay, cool. Then, so the next thing that I like to use it for is to help me learn things quickly. So quick techniques would be using the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 rule where you specify what is, can you summarize this with the Pareto principle? So you kind of, it would kind of break it down into plan. for you, or the Feynman technique to explain it in the simplest terms possible, or as if like you're a complete beginner. My favorite is to suggest analogies because I personally think in analogies, and it helps me when I can associate with other things. And maybe it's a product management thing, or maybe it's a stakeholder thing. When I use analogies, it takes the emotions out of whatever technology that people have associated with, and then we can actually talk about the thing. So for me, that is why analogies are very powerful, is when I can dissociate any emotions that are tied to a particular topic that I want to dissociate from. So
Just to jump in for people, maybe people who are familiar with the so-called 80-20 rule, which is just another word for the Pareto principle that, typically it's like 80% of your profit is going to come from 20% of your customers, that 80% of the satisfaction of your users is going to come from 20% of the features that you put in, like these, that there's this general principle that I guess what it tells us is, a lot of the times focusing on that, that 20% of the effort of a project will get you 80% of the benefit, and that the last 20%, the 80% of the work is only going to get you 20% more value. So it's going to be very expensive. Now, what the relationship between this 80-20 rule and your use of AI, are you get a little more specific about how you're using the AI to leverage the Pareto principle?
So I'm having it kind of create like learning plans or break down concepts that I'm trying to learn. So what it would do is kind of cover the most prominent things to understand the concept.
So teach me the most important 20% of the concepts in this field that I'm about to be doing product management about.
Yes.
Learning. Okay, great. Okay, now go back to the Feynman technique. I could do that a little bit slower because I think it went right by me.
Okay, thank you. So Feynman is basically breaking it down into the simplest form. So you can suggest for the LLM to explain a thing to you as a complete beginner, or as if you were a 5-year-old. And this is
Yes,
where,
I've done that kind of thing, really.
yeah,
Like, I'm completely no context at all. Like, give me the most simple explanation of this thing. I haven't ever tried that and reducing the temperature, so I would be less worried that it's inventing stuff. Cool. And then analogies. So is the analogies also part of the Feynman thing, or that's a separate idea?
To me, that's a separate idea because analogies are a little bit more complex. You need to understand the concept enough to associate with something else. So to me, that's the next level, that it allows you to kind of like map it differently in your brain.
Nice. Okay. Thank you.
I don't agree with the Pareto principle. Andrew, do you want to say more?
Yeah, so actually, this is something that in when I was in college, I just graduated. They talked a lot about it in marketing
Mm-hmm.
and other classes, and I keep getting notifications on my phone. Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, and I never thought that it really was more than it feels like something that maybe statistically come out so that maybe on average it can be likely that that could happen, but I like there are so many situations in life where it seems like 1% of the effort gives 99% of the returns, or like it's such a range that maybe the 80-20 is just statistically like the most average likelihood you're going to have, but not like a hard and fast rule.
I think that generally people would agree with you that we're not really saying that exactly, 80% of your customers are going to produce, 20% of the customers are going to produce 80% of the profit. We're saying that there's going to be, you know, you're going to be tempted to put a lot of energy into retaining a customer who's not actually generating any profit at all. Be careful, right? This is a rule saying be careful. Your priorities are probably not taking into account on the costs and benefits. That the costs and benefits are going to be out of whack. That building the
Yeah.
complete thing, every feature anyone could come up with
Um,
is going to be many, many times more expensive than the thing that's going to generate 80% of the happy customers. So yeah, I don't think anybody thinks that it's exactly 80 and 20. Like, I think people would
Right.
be
Okay. Yeah.
1%, 99%. So
I
I think,
just I always felt it wasn't even helpful to put a range like that on. Like if you want to say in the way that like don't over focus on one thing, like that's a better way to say it. Than to just say 80/20 because it feels like misleading. And if it helps people, then that's great. Maybe I just was understanding it a little differently.
I think
So
you got I think you got the useful part of the idea. What do you
Yeah.
think?
yeah, I agree. I think that's what Pareto principle is kind of getting at. You wanna it's a heuristic. You want to focus on the thing that brings kind of like the most return on your investment of time. And
Right.
the other bit that I have here is just for kind of a reminder if you don't know what Pareto principle is. Because as
Gotcha.
Eric pointed out, I had kind of breezed past it. Um, so yes.
Can I just
Thank
add
you.
one
That
other
really helps
point
me
here?
understand.
Um,
You were saying?
yeah, I wanted to just add a point here, which is that I mean, somewhat I just read it as like if you look at a bell curve, uh, oh, I see. Yeah, if you look at like a bell curve or something like that, at some point you just get to a point of diminishing returns is
Mm-hmm.
sort of one way of looking at it. But it's important to understand that this is a principle that's especially useful in business, where business can afford to just make its money by ignoring a certain segment of the market. Um, and sometimes where you're very cost driven and you have to do things a certain way. But people sometimes say we should run government like a business. And government has a commitment to all its citizens. So this becomes a recipe for leaving people out and stuff. And so as you're thinking about applying this principle, I just wanted to throw in a thing here where we sort of learn that we're used to doing things a certain way. And
Yeah.
this has always served me really well. And then we go into some other context and we draw on our skills. And this is a place where a lot of ill comes into government around just the presuppositions that come with this. It's fine for what you're talking about, but it
Yes.
was just an opportunity to just add that little like reminder in the back of your mind for some other day.
Oh,
That
Sandeep. Yes. I'm sorry. Do you want to respond to that before I mention Sandeep has an interesting question? Go ahead.
uh, I will get into it, but thank you for bringing that up, Ken. I think that's a really good point that this covers kind of like a section and there is a gap there.
Mhm.
Sandeep asks, how does the
Pareto principle work in training AI? I don't actually know how to answer that. Does anyone else know?
and I would tend to think it's going to mean let's say if you're doing fine tuning, that going broad is going to be valuable, right? That you're going to um um you know getting everything you could possibly fine tune your model with may be less important than getting broad coverage that kind of if there are yeah, I mean that's the first thing that occurs to me, but I don't have anything really brilliant to say. Okay, back to you, Tanny.
I would say that's why I use this kind of prompt specific for learning because the idea is to just jumpstart so you get kind of the broad surface. And to get to Ken's point, a thing on the other side of the spectrum is to think about gap analysis. So what I have done is after I have analysis or strategy, I have asked it for gaps because I can think of certain things and I'm sure there are things I can't think of. So these are ways that you can ask for it. What are the gaps that you see, and revise the to address those gaps. So you can actually iterate with it as you identify more kind of weaknesses with your analysis. And it's not bulletproof, but it gives a starting point, especially if there are trajectories that I haven't thought about.
If you're gonna, if you can,
Could
or
you,
are going to give us any examples of
yeah,
this,
could
like
you give an
publishing
example of
in
how you do
public.
this?
An example of how I do this.
Yeah,
Uh,
just because like I've tried to do this in the past and I've had trouble like because I feel like I don't know the right questions to get it to actually help me address like the gaps.
Do
Yeah,
you,
if you're linking any, if you have, if you want to do any kind of example in this area, either now or after you've finished most of the talk, that would be wonderful. I'd love, yeah.
so I think it might be fun to work through, like, Andrew, if you said you have tried to, what are the things that you have tried to?
So, so for example, if there's a project and I just like I know I'm probably missing something and I'll be like, could you like make recommendations on what like I might be forgetting in my like analysis here or what sort of things I could be forgetting? Sometimes
Yes.
it's randomly spot on, but sometimes it like totally misses the point and is just it goes off on almost a tangent. So I don't know how you try to like direct it to actually respond to you in a way that's relevant to what you're asking versus just going off on a tangent.
So what I've done is this part, like you specify the kind of expert that perspective, that persona that you would like for them to like for the LMM to simulate. So that would probably be more targeted. And then the temperature would be probably the thing that I would recommend to play around with, because that's where you are going to get a wider range of something that is more black and white, or something that is more out of this world, where it's actually trying to simulate an idea. I just use OpenAI. I for my purposes.
You know, Tanny,
How do you
I was going to
how do you
that's one of the most common things I do is if I write something or I have a plan for something, I'll paste it in and I'll say, what am I leaving out or what am I not thinking about? And a few times I've written like a whole chapter in a book, and I've asked it. I said, you know, given the topics I'm talking about, am I leaving anything out? And quite often it's almost like a human mentor tapping me on the shoulder and saying, yes, you know, you didn't discuss this, and this is commonly, you know, it's nothing I couldn't do myself. It just saves a lot of time.
Okay, so we're talking there, a gap in, for example, a piece of writing. And I guess I was thinking more about an example where I'm looking for a threat. You know, there's there's some theories about bad things that might happen in the upcoming election. And I'd like to think about, ooh, what are all the clever things that people are not talking about that could happen?
Yeah, Eric,
Um,
the trouble with that is that you're trying to get it to predict something that's out of training sample.
Mhm.
Oh, large language model is going to do a horrible job trying to predict like a black swan event. If that's where you're kind of aiming here. But it's very good if there's some topic that is fairly common, and just to back you up if you're forgetting something. Uh, but as far you know, I've never really heard of a large language model really predicting things like threats
I'm
that are.
not talking about
Actually, I haven't seen it, but I've been thinking a lot about this issue, and I expect that given the training sets that they have, if it's just like public writings on stuff, that what it's likely to do is to have, because this is the thing that they lean on in the case of doctors, the big results have been um, that if there's a low probability thing that only certain people are looking for, like there's one writer out there that's just wishing somebody would listen to him saying, but they might stuff the ballot boxes or they might, whatever the thing is. And nobody else is listening, like because it's even-handed in its reading of all of the various things, there's some chance it would find it. It's not going to think of a new threat, but it's going to bubble up a threat that's not the most common one to cite, I would bet.
My thoughts are then it's dependent on also which model you are using, because then it needs to be like the updated version. And um
Yeah.
it so it depends on also the bias of the recommendation engine, what they're referring to as their sources. So if I think about like what was it? Is it perspective? No wait, I can't remember what the does someone remember?
Are you talking about context?
No, there's a I cannot remember it right now. Okay, I'll come back to it when I can remember.
Mhm.
Okay.
I'll be putting links into the YouTube version that Tanny anything Tanny sends me. Okay, you can keep going.
All right. Okay, so I think there's a question on how you specify temperature. You literally just put it in as temperature. So I'm gonna scroll quickly to find it. So for example here, Eric, we were chatting the other day about first principles. And literally, I just put in more alternatives temperature to get different ideas and suggestions. And it will recognize it. So it's a simple input. Okay.
You find that's true across all of the different engines?
Ooh, I haven't used other engines. I usually just use ChatGPT because it's good enough.
Mark's got me into Abacus that's got several different engines available, so maybe Mark knows.
Ooh.
Um, that's a good question. No, I usually actually access language models programmatically. I do it from small Python scripts, usually sometimes other languages. I just I rarely use the web interfaces, and when you call the APIs, temperature is just one of many parameters you can set. But with ChatGPT, you can certainly customize that. I mean, there are options for doing that.
Mhm.
And for the other system I use, I don't usually play with it that much. So blank on that one, sorry.
So Andrew, I recommend just try it because it's pretty intuitive, I would say. Okay. The last example I have will be on rationalizing decisions. A lot of times there's decision like analysis paralysis. So one of the things that I have to consider is different perspectives, different personas, and before I go in to talk to a stakeholder, this is helpful to kind of like think through what they might be thinking about, and things that I should be paying attention to. So these are kind of ways to a phrase to kind of just get those ideas out and quickly and understand the user.
Have you ever had it actually more or less, draft a first draft of a questionnaire or any kind of opinion research vehicle?
I haven't done opinion research, but I think one thing that I've been thinking about doing is take all the opinions that we have collected and have it categorized and pull out the themes. And I think that is very powerful because a lot of times it feels hard to identify it, but the model is going to be able to identify clusters better than I think I would. because I'm going to have my bias. And if I have a different bias when I see the results of whatever it has summarized, then I can think on it. And that gives me something to work with.
Cool.
I'd like to inject a caveat on that. I just last night I uploaded a bunch of things I've said on Mastodon into this system so that I could organize some thoughts and see if maybe I could write a book based on things I've written. And so I
Okay.
said, can you pull out like 20 themes or the chapter headings for various things? And it made up a bunch of stuff. So it's an
Okay.
opportunity when it's doing that for it not to be so specific. And I'm really going to have to study like where it quoted stuff I didn't say and all sorts of stuff. So when you're doing
Oh,
like general stuff like that, I don't know. I wish I could be more specific about what I'm saying, but it was really quite surprising because I had given it such targeted information.
Does
so
it
one thing,
seem like reducing the temperature would help there? Does anybody know?
Hmm. I was using ChatGPT 4.0 with no specification of temperature, so whatever the default was.
I don't actually know what the default is. Does
Yeah.
anyone know?
Ask it. It will probably lie.
I haven't actually tried asking it parameters about asking it about itself. That is interesting.
Yeah. It's not very metacognitive in general, so I don't know that it would know. But I don't
Oh.
know what the default temperature is, but for problems like that,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes what I found useful is to give it, I've got my list of, say, Mastodon posts from your example, and have it tell it to give me the output, not of just fine themes, but give me a JSON file back with Mastodon statement and theme. And so it copies my own input back with it tagging the sort of categorization I've used or that it's come up with. And that's helped me a lot with avoiding or at least making it very obvious if hallucination does occur.
That sounds like a good suggestion. I'll try that next.
Yes, I agree. And I would limit or change the number of categorizations because it might make it more appropriate. Because if there's too many, I say play around with that. The number of categorization and the temperature.
Good idea.
Also, when we're talking about things like perspectives, another thing that I like to do, and actually I use the same approach in a lot of cases, I like to give it a framework. So I might say, instead of just give me multiple perspectives, I might say, use Edward de Bono's 6 Thinking Hats and categorize them by that and give me arguments from that perspective. Or if I'm writing copy, I might give it some, a copywriting framework that I want it to use. And I find I get results that I like a lot more when I don't give it such an open-ended world to draw from, but kind of direct it in the approach more.
Yes.
Ooh, I'm making notes about that prompting with the 6 thinking hats. I didn't. Whose idea was that? Awesome.
Julius, I think.
Yeah, I mentioned that one. I've got a bunch of frameworks I like, but if you're looking for just different perspectives, that's a great one here.
Yeah,
Very
please,
I also really
please
like
volunteer to give us
telling
a
it
talk.
to
It
look
sounds
at
like
it.
you're good. Sounds like you've got some prompt engineering talent, Julius. Please volunteer to give a future talk. Go ahead, Tanny.
I would also recommend if there are any like books or papers that it might have been trained on, you can reference those and be like use the ideas from and then like such and such book. And it usually is a good idea if it's a popular book and you give the author the ideas. So like, for example, I just was hosting an event and I wanted a lot of people to come to the event. So I was like, use ideas from the book called, it's a book by a guy named Jonah Berger about like, like basically marketing. It's about spreading the word, and I had it use that, and it gave a really good invite to the people to attend the event.
Nice. Back to you, Tanny.
Cool. And the last one I have is suggesting prioritization, because a lot of times a lot of my job is just deciding what is priority. One of the things is having a framework. if you already have a framework in place, it's fine. But if you don't have a framework and kind of starting out cold, this just helps me get things moving so that I don't have to build something from scratch, and it takes the emotion out of it. And then one thing that I realized, if you have to choose between something and you don't like the choices that you're presented in whatever order, then it becomes super obvious and you can think through, why do you think something else is more important? So just that listing of it in itself, that helps me kind of get out of that paralysis that I might get into.
Nice.
And that is pretty much all the kind of prompts that I have. And I want to end with this quote that to motivate y'all to just do what you can.
Nice.
So people who are willing to turn on their cameras are invited to do so. And my and I would love people to ask questions that have this like this structure if people are so inclined.
We're still locked out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who just let me see. That was Kent. Um, but I'll just ask everyone to start their video. Ask, ask, ask. And where are you, Kent? I don't see you. I will look around further. Oh, there you are. Ask to start video. Okay, so one of the things you've told me is that in your experience, um, there's lots of times when people are in analysis paralysis and or some other, they're not making a decision. That's a key challenge in your world, is to get people to actually make a decision. I'd be interested in strategies in general that you use in those cases, and in particular, how you might use clever prompts and stuff around that. Is that something you feel like talking about?
I can. When I think about kind of getting people to make a decision, I don't know if it's a prompt per se. The thing that's important is to understand why people are not making decisions and what they feel they need to make the decision. From a business side, a lot of times they have different motivating factors. I think someone pointed out it's about cost. It is about how do they grow the market. So identifying what those things are and coming to the table with those numbers already ahead of time, that helps make the decision. And if the numbers are too small, whatever it is fine. It's more at least them identifying that they don't have what they need or what they need to move forward. So I would experiment with different ideas on what they feel like they need to make the decision. Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, if you felt like telling a little bit of a story to make it a little more specific, that would be fine. Or we can get another question from someone else.
This scenario, I think I don't know that I can summarize this real quickly, but it's kind of a similar approach to what I was saying about the six thinking hats. Is I like to find generically, when using AI, powerful frameworks that I can either reference because it knows about them, they're publicly available, or that I can quickly describe in my prompt in order to get better results. So when it comes to decision making, I'm a huge fan of a guy named Chase Hughes. He's a mentor and now a friend these days. So fair warning there that I might be a bit biased with Chase's work at this point, but he is a 20-year military veteran, taught spies how to get people to, do spy stuff and things like that. And so he's got these really powerful frameworks. In this case, he's got what he calls the 6 decision pillars that describe 6 different ways people make choices, right? So those are things like deviance. People like to just do stuff that's different, right? You spend a lot of time in Portland or Austin, you'll find a lot of deviance people. Novelty. A lot of people on this call, this Zoom, probably novelty people. It tends to be pretty popular in tech, right? They like to do things that are new. They want to be the first person with the new thing. Social. They like to do it because somebody else does it, right? So you can give this framework to the tool, and this is just one example. You might have different ones, and then have it either, if you know what the person's decision-making strategy is, say, hey, how do I tune it to, this person's a social decision maker, right? Or you can have it also analyze some of their content and say, oh, how would you say they're making decisions based on this framework? And then get that answer, and then have it also tune what you're trying to accomplish to that decision-making strategy. So like I said, it's a general approach that I like. Find a powerful framework, either reference it or teach it to the model, and then ask it to do things. Because if, I'll go back to copywriting, for example. My style of copywriting is very heavily informed by direct marketing. And if I'm just asking it to write a headline for me, then it might very well be drawing from, say, a brand marketing approach, or it might be drawing from something that's more clickbaity than I like, right? So if I can give it that better guidance, either explicitly or just by referencing something that it knows about, I find I get a lot better results for me, right? Might not be the best results for you because you might have a different approach.
So in the case of Chris Hughes, it's
Chase Hughes.
Chase Hughes. It's Chase Hughes's what framework?
So it's best documented in a book called The 6-Minute X-Ray. And this is part of what he calls the 6MX compass, which is part of what you mostly learn to use in that book. And this is the decision pillars section. So decision-making strategies. There's a bunch of others, things that you use to profile a person using his framework, things like their social needs and their underlying values and their locus of control and all these other things. But specifically to decision making, I would just teach the prompt, a very brief description of what the framework looks like, and then have it, generate my results.
By the way, Julius, I hope you will come and give a talk, but you must use the fuzzy background. Just like this, because then we're going to tell people that you are actually an LLM yourself.
I can't claim to be actually intelligent, but I can claim to be artificially intelligent. So I think that's right on my
end. Hey, we haven't gotten any questions from a woman, so ISRA is pronounced ISRA, is it? If you're still by your computer, maybe you'd throw in a question, please.
So yeah, I've been listening to this talk, and it's very insightful ideas from all of you. It's a great learning opportunity for me. So I was just going through Tanny's LinkedIn.
Okay.
And then I noticed you've been you have a very diverse background, and you also mentioned that you use data a lot in your work, usually as in product space.
Sure.
So just a quick question. Didn't really think about it, but since I'm supposed to ask something, so a very random question: how
Okay.
do you use data when you're working on your products? And can you give me an example of any product that you've worked on where you've used data as a baseline for your decision making?
I would say I tend to need to use data to understand the problem space. If it's a thing that we want to invest in or not invest in. So back to the example that folks are talking about, whether the 80-20 rule. A thing that is super important for me is to understand the market and who we're building the thing for. So that's the thing that I need to look at the data to understand what is our target customer or people that we want to design the solution for. What does the ideal look like? And when we don't identify that well, rather, what we want to do is we want to identify the ideal customer and the non-ideal ones. And usually that is the painful one, because once a company is established, there's always going to be a customer that isn't the right fit, but we have had them forever. and kind of highlighting how that data is the only way, in my mind, to show and decouple from the emotions how this customer is not the right fit because they are too costly or they have too many complaints and costly in a different way. So that is how I use data to inform and help folks decide in a way that is less emotional. Otherwise, it's very hard to align and activate folks if when the emotions involved, where you can't get everyone behind the idea because of it. So
Yeah, I want to put in a plug for the book Crossing the Chasm, by the way, for people who don't know that one, because that's sort of the extreme case of that, where you have to fire all of your initial customers in order to move on into the sort of larger.
I did,
Uh,
that is extreme, yes.
yeah. But you know, early innovators are often not the model for how to be a sustainable thing. And so you have to do an entire change of mindset there. At least that's their thesis. And it's a fascinating read. They've been keeping it up to date for decades now, and apparently good research.
Oh my, I didn't know they were keeping it up.
Oh
They were
yeah.
keeping it up to date. I loved it when it first came out.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know anything about
Yeah, it was more a hypothesis back then. I mean, they sort of, you know, came out with this claim and thought, here's a good book and stuff, but they've been, I guess, following that a lot, and there's a lot to be said for it. I mean, there's still some variation, but yeah.
Thank you for your question, Isra.
Yeah, good question.
Thank you. This is so, I must say, like, I'm just starting off my career here in the US, and this is a very important session for me. I'm learning so much from all of you. So thank you for hosting this session.
Yes,
thank you. Esther, the best way to learn is to take on a topic, do a bunch of reading and give a talk.
Yeah.
Please put contact information in the chat. You can send it just to me, and I can nag you and so that you're encouraged. Mark, do you want to say a few good words about like how much you've learned from writing books and articles? And I assume it's been a wonderful forcing function.
Yeah, I think you overestimate how much I write. I've written like 20 books in 40 years. That only averages one every 2 years. That's not too excessive, right? But
the number of people I have to tell you that I grew up in a family, Mark, where one of the main slogans was there are more ABDs than PhDs, right? There are more people who do all the coursework, pass all the quals, and never get around to writing this book called their PhD thesis, right? So the fact that you only wrote 20, but like the percentage of the population that's written one book, how many? The percentage that's written 20 books in any period of time, Mark, that's you really can afford to pat yourself on the back for a moment there. 20 books is pretty awesome.
Yeah, no, I will tell a story. I'm very much non-academic. I have a degree in physics from like 45 years ago and never use it because I've always just been a computer programmer. And about 25 years ago, I was on a DARPA panel for neural network tools, and they had all the luminaries, all the famous people: Stephen Grossberg, Gail Carpenter, I think maybe Hinton was on that. But they were all very academic. And I was a programmer and I was writing a commercial product implementing all of the different models. And so I would, in our meetings, I would just sort of sit back and just kind of like absorb it all in. But every once in a while, somebody would have a question about how something was implemented, and heads would turn to the computer programmer, right? It's stuff like that I enjoy more than. But yeah, anyway, I actually try to encourage people to write at least one book because for one thing is it's a real, pardon my bird, it's a really great way to meet people because some small number of people who read your books are going to start calling you on the phone, email, and it's a really great way to kind of expand one's network a little bit. So that's probably the best reason to write a book, is that you get to meet some interesting people that way.
Actually, I was listening to an interview with a brilliant marketeer, and he says, I do a lot of different things, but my podcasts have an audience of one, the person I'm trying to get to know. I invite them on a podcast. If anyone else listens to it, great. I use social media, I use blogging, I do a lot of things, but my podcasts have an audience of one. If I invite you, it's because I want to get to know you. That's I thought that was fascinating. So let's see, Kent. Do you have any questions or observations or things you want to share?
Oh, I think I've been interjecting them as they come up. I mean, I've definitely enjoyed the going through all these details. I guess I would say one thing about procrastination. I've been trying to figure out how it meshes onto this conversation, is that you were saying that you were curious about why people don't do things. And with people, some things are unconscious. So like in a computer program, like if you want a new workspace, you just started up your program. It needs a lot of compute area, or something you in C you would call malloc or something, and other things you have automatic memory management or something like that. But it's still a low-level operation. You have to make space. I assume that my brain has to make space for things too, but I do not sit there and say to it, it would be nice if you would clear an area because now I'm going to do this. Instead, what I do is I wander around unproductive for a few days, and I can't figure out why. And I have to believe that there's some sort of space-making thing that's below my level of consciousness that I cannot really answer questions about. When I first learned, like I studied Spanish for many years, and then I taught myself Portuguese within a month with some pretty heavy stuff. But I taught myself by approximating, like just attaching little notations to every word in Spanish, saying it's not quite like this. And I didn't really dignify it as its own language in my brain. I'm quite certain that as I was speaking, I was just transliterating Spanish. But at some point over time, another area got made that I could deal with Portuguese as a more direct thing that was a thing in its own right. And I think that there's a lot of that in procrastination, that you're worried about things that you're trying to tease out. And so that's the reason why I'm mentioning it here, is that some of these things are things that maybe by conversation you can actually make explicit, and other things are happening in ways you can't. And so there's probably something of an art to figuring out which things you can ask the LLMs about, and which things, and knowing that there's some things that can't. Like when you talk to your customer and you say, why haven't they been buying? And the answer is, they're waiting on a purchase order to go through. Like it's just a subconscious thing. It's not like they're dithering around, they're not sure or something like that. There's just a piece that's invisible to you that you can't see what's going on. And then there are other things that are processes that you can become involved in. So I don't know whether that's helpful to you in thinking about it, but it is I introspect a lot about why I do various kinds of things, and it's the thing I know about procrastination. So I just thought I would share it in this context.
Thank you for sharing that. It sounds like you subconsciously created an atomic habit to get yourself to learn, which I love. If I don't know if you have read the book Atomic Habits.
I don't know that term, but I'll go and look it up.
Oh, well, Julius, you're a fan. Want to say a couple of words?
I'm a huge fan of James Clear in the book Atomic Habits. In fact, when I first read it, I thought that somebody who taught me hypnosis years ago had written it, because it sounded like it was echoing all the ways that hypnotists would get you to do things. And for those that aren't familiar with modern hypnosis, it's I don't take any of your county fair or high school or stage show ideas about hypnosis. They're mostly wrong or inaccurate or misleading. Just think of hypnosis as, how do you communicate with the subconscious? And that will get you probably a lot farther than most of the pop culture views of it. But Atomic Habits is a great book. He covers a lot of really great stuff for habit formation. I can't recommend it highly enough.
But partly what I'm saying, I mean, I think that's useful, and I'll want to look that up as well. But partly what I'm saying is a little bit like forgive yourself that you can't communicate with subconscious in places to not always expect to. It's just like most of these things, like knowing when you can and when you can't is so you don't beat yourself up over the things that you can't do. Because that kind of goes with your quote at the end about working with what you have. So, which I thought was a good quote, by the way.
Thank you. Well, I asked ChatGPT to give me ideas and gave it a bunch of temperatures. So
Well, you made a really, I don't want to get off onto a psychology topic since this is not the topic of the group primarily, but I could talk about this stuff forever. But another tip to your point, Ken, is think of speaking with your unconscious more like talking to your dog, and you'll get a lot farther. It doesn't understand language, but understands emotion and tone and habit and repetition, and it understands what just happened really, really well. And if you think about the way that you talk to yourself in your own head, most of us, I'm willing to bet, everybody I can see on screen here, I'm willing to bet everybody I can see, in your own head, you probably talk to yourself in a way that if another person spoke to you that way, you would potentially punch them in the face. You're really hard on yourself. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't do you any favors when it comes to your subconscious. So giving gratitude to those crazy ideas you have that don't work out, that's a way of communicating with your subconscious. Speaking to yourself well, not trying to use language too much. If I tell my subconscious, remember that I'm supposed to show up at the CodeBorging meetup on Wednesday at this time, that language means nothing to it, right? It doesn't have the linguistic ability. It's much more like a dog, but you might think your dog understands the words you use, but it really doesn't. It understands a lot more about your tone and context, and your subconscious is the same way.
Funny you should mention that, Jules. I just realized that I've never ever given a talk about arguably the single most important thing I ever learned, which is how to do a 3-column exercise. Which David Burns retired essentially from brain research. He is a psychiatrist, and because he found that cognitive behavior therapy worked so well for depression, anxiety, whatever. And if I had to say, like, what's the single most valuable skill? The ability to just write down. So I'm telling myself these like crazy negative things. What category? Oh, that's should thinking. That's that's all or nothing thinking, whatever. And then just to put down the God's honest truth and realize that, oh my God, my feelings shift on a dime when I do this. So I really ought to give a talk about it. More recently, I've been really finding the work of Marshall Rosenberg and his followers. This is so-called NVC. I hate the term nonviolent communication, gives people totally wrong impressions about what it is. But this idea of listening to what I'm telling myself, and instead of just like debunking it in a kind of semi-scientific style, just listening to like, okay, so what's the need that this thought is really trying to get me to meet? Oh, it's really trying to motivate more action. Okay, so then I really have a need for contribution or progress or something. Okay, so like, what can I do to meet that need and to kind of put the jackally thought to bed? Okay, you've been heard, message received. You can go to bed now. I have a plan for how to treat that need more seriously. This is something my friend Mara Alight, who's a certified nonviolent communication trainer, calls the tree exercise, which I love. But these are like 2 different ways of dealing with the kind of internal monologue. I'm thinking someday maybe anyway. But yeah, so I should find a context to kind of share, because those have been utterly transformational. Anybody who wants to talk to me about that stuff, I love it. I've got tons of resources. You were saying, Mark?
Yeah, I got a question. I've been meditating for probably close to 50 years, and an offshoot of that is the ability to control what you're thinking at any given time. And so what you were just saying, Eric, I was trying to think of the similarities. I mean, you're basically tagging memories, which you also do in meditation. You go, well, that's a nice thought, but for tomorrow kind of thing. I wonder if there's any cross correlation between psychologists and
Well, I will tell
and
you one funny story, Mark.
Yeah.
The inventor of what I believe may still be the most well-researched, positively researched treatment for borderline personality disorder. Marsha Linehan developed this thing, and probably is still developing this thing called DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. And to be a DBT therapist, you have to meditate. That's kind of definitionally true, that the therapist has to meditate. If you can get the client to meditate, marvelous, but the therapist must meditate. That like that's an agreement or something that they have you make. In part because one of the things that you're trying to teach the person, often it's a person with borderline personality disorder, is to do one thing at a time. And to be kind of fully present with, and her theory was, if you're not practicing that yourself, how good are you going to be at teaching it to someone else? She tells a story about in the middle of doing some kind of assessment form thing with a patient, the person reached out and said to grab something on the desk, this globe on the desk, and said, "Is this really made out of like?" And she pushed the form away and said, "Would you like to talk about the globe?" And the patient said, "Yeah, not really." She pushed the globe away. It's like she's like, "I'm modeling one thing at a time," right? And like that's part of what I think. I'm not an expert in dialectical behavior theory, but I just love the idea that the therapist must meditate. That's a given. I think that's hysterical. They're very intense. I mean, I have a lot of admiration for dialectical behavior therapists. By the way, hey, Tanny, another question. A key challenge you product managers, I always make it sound like project manager. You product man, another key challenge you product managers face, and how you use or might consider using AI to help maybe a beginner product manager do that X thing better. I like putting people on the spot, especially when they tell me I'm a little nervous. I'm like, then put you on the spot.
It's interesting. Your question has twofold. One, you had it about beginner PMs versus what PMs would do. And okay, for beginner PMs, I think the single hardest thing to do would be figuring out how to say no, because a lot of my job is to tell my stakeholders no. And it's a hard thing to say when you're talking to a VP or to someone that has escalated some problem. So a lot of it is figuring out how do you say no in a way that sounds progressive. And I think that is helpful to ideate with it on how you can figure out the language until you figure out your own voice. I figured out my way without LMMs, right? But if I were to restart, that is what I would do. I know a friend who actually would use the LMMs to figure out how to rephrase things, especially when she's pissed off about something. So that is another alternative. Because a lot of what a PM does is chaos management, and figuring out the right words to move the ball forward, I think is the angle that I have to keep in mind. Sometimes I cannot, but that's a thing that is top of mind. And a thing that I'm developing a muscle for is recognizing when that I've lost sight of it. And I think a lot of agile processes or any kind of process that we have been part of with the software development cycle is to basically incorporate practices to reflect on this. If we think about retrospectives, if we think about like planning, the whole point is to reset, review, and figure out how to move forward and put down the things that don't matter.
So, like if you feel like screen sharing for a second and actually brainstorming with ChatGPT about how you might say no. By the way, one trick that I did learn from nonviolent communication about saying no,
Yes.
that I think is awesome, that I do want to share, that often it's valuable. And I think about this specifically in the case where someone comes to you with an idea that they really worked on, but they came too late, or for some reason you can't do it. And really pausing and asking myself, what do I value about this idea? Wow, if someone had come to us with that idea, this or some other person, X months ago, before we'd already built 80% of this thing this other way, wow, what would have been good? Well, we could have gotten it done faster, it would run faster, it would be simpler, it would be whatever. And to really like fully feel into how awesome that would be. And then to share with the person, wow, that's brilliant. I'm so glad you shared it with me. We could have saved time and money and, increased customer satisfaction. It's so sad that we're so close to completing it in a less excellent way. It's really heartbreaking that nobody had this idea earlier. But the general idea is say yes to the person, even if you have to say no to the idea. So that that's like, oh, uh, Tanny, are you free for lunch? Hey, Eric, if I would love to have lunch with you if it weren't for this intense deadline that I have right now. Particularly, I would want to brainstorm with you about XYZ thing. That would be really great. It's just too bad. So you're like finding ways to say yes to the person. Is a wonderful thing that emanates from this needs consciousness from Marshall Rosenberg that I love. But I'd love to see like what would you do with ChatGPT to help you come up with ways to avoid unnecessary upset with a customer. If you feel like screwing around with screen sharing, feel free.
I don't know if how about at a different time?
Sure. I mean, like my inclination would be to say, be my coach, right? Um, I've got, ask me questions about this situation, and I'll tell you when I think you have enough information. And then say, give me 25 ways, to explain why this X feature can't be in release Z. And just let it come up with lots of options and then feel into, well, what do I think is going to land well for the person I need to disappoint in this way? I find actually telling it, you know, like you are Marshall Rosenberg, or you are someone who really, really believes in feelings and needs consciousness. This idea that instead of looking at the world in terms of right, wrong, good, bad, should, shouldn't, it's just some strategies meet these needs, some strategies meet those needs, right? That a kind of a morality-free universe, like inhabit, be my coach from this, which I guess is very similar, Julius. One talk I would love for you to give is to come with 6 or 7 frameworks and show prompts like, so I put my Calendly link in here. I would love it if you set a time. Um, but yeah, that may be a really unusual prompt engineering workshop, which is one that focuses on, tell your LLM to use this framework, tell your LLM to use that framework. That would be a crazy interesting. Um, um, who thinks I had a really good idea? I do. Um, so you don't want to try that right now, Tanny, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. Hey, Sunday.
I'll save you, Tanny, by interjecting a comment to Eric. How is that?
That sounds good. Thank you,
Yeah.
Amor.
Yeah, so when you're just talking about saying yes to the person and no to the idea, I was kind of remembering back to when I had my first good job out of college, and my dad sat me down and he says, "Oh, he says, always just tell people the truth." He says, just like you're being paid money, they deserve, you're absolutely, you may be wrong, but they deserve the knowing the truth.
Right.
Easy to say, but then how do you tell people the truth uh, and make it nice so they don't feel bad? And that was years trying to figure out. And Eric, your little quip about saying yes to the person and no to the idea, because I don't think
Actually, the phrase that I liked is you're saying really no to the strategy. I mean, how is that? Let me see. Why do I feel that might be different from idea? You're
Well,
not.
there used to be a thing a long time ago called egoless programming, which was really about not having an ego, but separating your personal ego from the decisions that you were making so that you could stand back from things and saying, whatever it is that I'm saying to you, I'm not talking about whether or not I affirm you as a person. I'm talking about whether or not we're going to do this particular thing. And I think it was a good kind of strategy, and it's probably got some other name now. These things always like take on other names and stuff. But I think, now they probably call it like needs-based decision making or data-driven decision making or some such thing. And it's probably the same kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, just saying to people, something separate that affirms them as people can be pretty helpful. I mean, to Mark's point, I always have things that I found I'm often not the popular one in the room because I'm a truth teller. And early in my career, it just made people mad a lot. And I sort of came to grips with the fact that over time, people just got used to the fact that they could trust me as a result of that. And so there was sort of an evolved understanding. But I still find myself in situations where I'm watching something go and I'm going like, really? I have to be the person to say it. Nobody else is going to say it. No one's going to like me anymore. But it has to be said anyway. I could just feel it coming. And people are like, you could have stopped yourself. And I'm like, but that wasn't the problem to be solved. It was like how to communicate the truth.
Kent, that book, Egoless Programmer, literally changed my career for the one little trick that if your ego is involved in your code, you can't see bugs. And I thought about that. I probably went sailing and thought about that quietly and digested that and kind of realized how awful it is trying to find something wrong with something that you identify with yourself rather than some artifact that you're working on.
Right.
Wait, had that really helped your programming by
It did. It made me put at arm's length. Code was something somebody's paying you to write, and it didn't matter whether it was mine or somebody else's I was working with. To not have that like tight ownership. It did. I mean, that one part of what's the guy's Weisenberg was his name? I forget the
Harold
author.
Weisenberg. Yep.
Yeah, Gerald Weisenberg. Yeah, he also wrote a very good book on how to be a consultant, which was useful, but not quite as much as the programming book.
Mark, thank you for that. I feel like it requires a lot of self-awareness to realize how to be objective. So that's really awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, not just objective, but detached, I think is part of it. Because I mean, when I've been in management situations, what I always tell people is that people get really caught up in the notion of what's right and wrong, and that's their identity, almost their identity. Like, this is the way I think it should be done. But in a team situation, you really can't. And so I always say to my team, like, the definition of right is I'm the person that's going to have to take responsibility. And so whatever I decide, it's not about my decision is better than yours. but I'm the person that will have to help you navigate it when it fails or whatever. Like, we'll give you credit if it succeeds, but we're still going to do it my way, because different people have different notions of right. You put a different manager in that same position, they'll make a different decision, because maybe they're good at just talking their way out of a situation, or maybe they have really strong technical expertise on how to fix that particular problem, or there are all these different ways that people vary. And so what's right is not what's in your head, what I'm doing right now, what's my ego. It's this much more independently floating thing in the room. But yeah, sorry, I really get going on these things.
Not at all. That was lovely. Well, I really like that point from Mark. I'd never heard that before. And since I hate the experience of staring at my code and not making progress on fixing a bug, that's a wonderful tip. So it's not a bad thing to cap off. Tanny, it looked like you might be raising
So
your
I
hand.
have a question. Since y'all are programmers, how many of you have gotten ChatGPT to or any LMM to identify bugs for you or write unit tests? Because those are things that I feel like was super helpful. Because I'm not a programmer now, I don't do that. But I feel like if I were that, those are things that I would use it for. And I'm curious what your experience has been like.
Yeah,
Well,
I find it's good to find bugs in its own code. I mean, I'll often ask Claude or ChatGPT to write some simple code so I don't have to look up APIs, and then try running it, and you get a runtime error, and you just paste the runtime error back in, and you say what you get, that's wrong. You better search the web and take another cycle at that. But I've never actually thought about putting in
No.
my own code. I'm going to try that. I've
Which one are you going to try?
I've never tried, when I have a bug in my code, pasting the code in and explaining what's wrong. So I'm going to try that. That's a neat idea.
We've had it generate lots of, or actually have it write Python programs to generate test data.
Yes,
Yeah, that
that
works
I feel
too.
like would be awesome, because that's the part
Oh.
I hate thinking about when I was a programmer. I'm like, I can't think of all the scenarios.
Like I was trying to get some intern to do some machine learning stuff, and I was like, okay, so write a Python program that will generate like a lot of random data, but where there are specific patterns. When this column has this, if this column has that, then the elapsed time is going to be that, right? So yeah, it wrote a lovely Python program. I never even totally read every line to figure out exactly how it's doing it. But yeah, so test data, that's something that you can save, I think, a ton of time, because you can spend a lot of time generating dummy test data,
Yeah.
and write a Python program or something to do that is awesome.
You could go back in the series here and find the first talk by Llewellyn, for example, probably both of his talks, but I remember particularly the first one that he gave. He did some programming examples, and it had bugs in it, and he worked through it and stuff. So you can see it on screen and how that stuff works if you're just looking to watch something. It's a quite hands-on kind of talk.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, which reminds me, anyone who has not already subscribed to our YouTube channel, it's
I love the plug.
it's the at CodeBorging. It's on YouTube there. I put it in there, and all the streams are in there under streams. So you can, yeah, Llewellyn's talks are most relevant to this, and you can have your team go listen to them and get them to be, yeah, Llewellyn is the person who's been most focused on that kind of thing. Any last points before I shut things down?
Thanks, Tanny.
Thank you, Tanny, so much. This was great.
Yeah, thank you.
It was a lot of fun. Julius, please, did you get my my
I got your Calendly. I'll reach out to you. I was also thinking maybe
even if you don't
this
talk
is-
to me for a few weeks or a month or whatever, please
Yeah.
put it in the calendar so it's there. I like to have things to look forward to.
I feel like
And
the same group might like a psych borging or mind borging or sort of a parallel meetup. We seem to launch half of us off into psychology topics when it came up.
Yeah, I
No.
don't mind. I'd rather just keep building this one up, rather than and just maybe I'll open up
If you're fine with the tangents, I'm great.
Pardon?
If you're fine with the tangents into psychology, then yeah.
Oh yeah, I totally am. As long as we're having a good time and we're learning, that's cool. Okay. Yes. Tanny, please come back and do
Oh,
another talk sometime soon. This was awesome. Thanks so much.
thank you, everyone. And thank you, Eric, for organizing this. Bye.
Appreciate it.